What's going on? What's crack-a-lackin', my peoples? How you doing? I'm Jerry Quigley, and this is happening. Welcome to day 15 since Robert Mueller turned over the Mueller investigative report to the Department of Justice. This is the 15th day. We have now entered the third week since Robert Mueller turned over the Mueller report. And shockingly, there's all this talk about it. It was, the report says this, and the report says that, and the report says this, and the report says that. No one knows what the report says other than the people on Mueller's team who worked on it, and a handful of people at the Department of Justice who aren't speaking. And guess what? Unless you get your asses out in the street, we're never going to know what's in that report. And here's exactly why we're never going to know what's in that report. Prior to the rapist known as Brett Kavanaugh, prior to him being shoved down our collective throats and foisted on the court, this Republican hack who didn't have the gravitas to even be considered for the appeals court job that he was given as a reward for being a racist Republican sellout hack. So what happened with the rapist Kavanaugh? Well, you had many women coming forward with credible threats of being raped by Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, including allegations of gang rape and group rape. And so what happened during his nomination? Well, it was only slightly slowed down. It wasn't derailed. It wasn't brought to an end. It was only slightly slowed down by these credible accusations of rape being made against the rapist Supreme Court jurist Brett Kavanaugh. So what happened? So they had a fake scam investigation, right? And then once the investigation was done, the FBI prepared a report on the rapist Brett Kavanaugh. And then the report created by the FBI, and by extension, of course, the Department of Justice, the report on the rapist Brett Kavanaugh was kept secret. It was kept secret from the public, the press, and essentially even members of Congress. Because if they wanted to read the FBI report on Brett Kavanaugh, the only people that could read it were a handful of Congress people that would be allowed to walk into a secure, locked room without any recording devices of any kind whatsoever, and they would have 20 minutes to read through this 900-page report on the rapist Brett Kavanaugh. And we all fucking pretended that that was okay. We actually allowed our government to put out a report on a gang rapist on the Supreme Court, and we stood by as these bastards told us no one could look at this report except for a handful of Congress people, none of their aides, nothing can be recorded. They have to come to this room and this report remains secret. It's essentially a fucking locked box that's been sunk to the bottom of the Dead Sea. That's what happened to the report on the gang rapist known as Brett Kavanaugh, a.k.a. SCOTUS, Justice number 9. What would make you think that given that Trump has had the success that he did with the rapist Brett Kavanaugh at literally hiding the products of a Justice Department investigation, what would make you think that somehow the Mueller report is going to be released without your asses in the street demanding it? What makes you think the Mueller report is going to be released without your asses in the street demanding it? What makes you think the Mueller report is going to be released without your asses in the goddamn street demanding it? Trump already created a roadmap with the report on the gang rapist Brett Kavanaugh. His position is that I own and run this government. It is me who will decide what gets released, if anything, if ever. Now, let's go even a little bit further than that. Bill Barr, let's be clear, is a complete stand-up crazed racist. He did so in the service of previous racist Republican administrations. His job was to essentially make sure that when a insane racist Republican lost their mind, broke the laws of America and several other countries around the world in an effort to illegally sell weapons to people halfway around the world so that that money could be brought back to the United States and directed into the cause of the Contras in Central America. That's right, a bunch of crazy-ass white people decided they were going to break the law, illegally finance a terrorist group that murdered tens of thousands of people. Well, Jerry, how does that make Bob Barr a racist? Because he's fucking white, and he did this to poor brown people. And let me, if you happen to be some kind of crazed black despot, and for years and years you were fixated on a poor country filled with the shattered remnants of white people that have been screwed over by you for decade after decade after decade, guess what? When black thugs and killers target white people, they're called terrorists, and appropriate laws are invoked. When white supremacists work in the U.S. government, they're called cabinet members as opposed to terrorists. Bob Barr defended every illegal action associated with the Iran-Contra Gate. All of it. What was he defending? A bunch of crazed, violent, murderous white supremacists who illegally sought to fund an operation that killed tens of thousands of innocent people in Nicaragua and El Salvador. This racist, violent freak who is literally responsible for keeping these murderous thugs from the Reagan and Bush regimes out of prison for having murdered tens of thousands of innocent people, most of them women and children. Most of them women and children. So what did Bob Barr do? He sends a memo to the Justice Department. He sends a letter indicating that everything Bob Mueller is doing is wrong. It has to be stopped. This is just there's no standing to prosecute the president. Mueller must be stopped. Mueller must be stopped. Mueller must be stopped. And there's no such thing as collusion, and you can't obstruct justice if you're the president of the United States. This is the pitch that Bob Barr made to the White House, okay? The same day he sent this memo to Justice, they called him and said, hey, why don't you come in here and have lunch with us? Now, subsequently, this reporting just came out today, by the way. Subsequently, the Justice Department, they never acknowledged that this had ever happened. They never acknowledged that Bob Barr sent them a memo, and the same day he sent them the memo, he was invited to come in for lunch at the Department of Justice. They tried saying, oh, well, you know, we have this long-standing history, former Department of Justice workers, they come in for a brown bag lunch, and that's just all this was. Well, that's complete and utter bullshit, because that brown bag lunch thing, it was real. It did used to happen, but it hadn't happened for 2 years. It was shut down. And once they invited the racist Bob Barr, who was interested in sucking Trump's toes, once they invited the racist Bob Barr over for lunch to talk about a plan of what we can do to help the president, then they said, oh, well, this is just part of that brown bag lunch thing we've been doing. No, it's not. That program had been shut down 2 years earlier. And in addition to Bob Barr being invited to Justice Department for lunch the same day he sent them this 20-page memo saying that presidents can't be convicted of obstruction, the same day that happened, that he sent that memo, he was invited to come have lunch at the Department of Justice and share his thoughts. And the Department of Justice is now saying, and this is the part that's truly unbelievable, the Department of Justice is now saying that, well, what happened was, you see, what happened was Bob Barr sent his memo into the Department of Justice. It just happened to have arrived at the Department of Justice on the same day that they were already going to be reaching out to contact him to invite him in for lunch. The Department of Justice has literally said the memo arrived. Following that, Bob Barr was invited for lunch, but the two had nothing to do with each other. They were inviting Bob Barr to lunch after 30 years away from the Justice Department. They just decided to invite him for lunch that day, the same day that he sent this memo in, and A has nothing to do with B. It's so preposterous on the face of it, it's ridiculous. You have everyone freaking out over some fencing coach at Harvard. His home was worth roughly $500,000, and he sold it for $1 million to the father of a student who was looking to get into Harvard. So he paid this guy twice what his house is worth, and then this fencing coach allowed the man's child to enter Harvard as a fencing student. People are losing their minds, rightfully so. That's a $500,000 transaction. It's horrific and shouldn't have happened. What about Trump's home in Florida, in Palm Beach? He bought some property down there, tried to sell for $125 million, ridiculous gross markup. No one would buy it. It represented essentially a $60 million markup for Trump. He was going to make $54 million profit from this. No one would buy it. And then all of a sudden, a Russian oligarch showed up and overpaid $54 million for this property that no one would buy. Paid in cash, Trump walked away pocketing a $54 million profit. And he's now the president of the United States, and he's in bed with the Russians. Yes, we have to care about what goes on in kids being cheated out of their fair shot at college. But if you are outraged, as you should be, over some wealthy doctor fixing it so his feckless, untalented, corrupt offspring can get a place in an Ivy League university that he doesn't deserve, because apparently Ivy League workers now, coaches and everyone is saying, oh, it's time to cash in. If you are outraged over that, I would imagine that you'd be 100 times more outraged over Donald Trump's profit-taking of $54 million in a transaction with a Russian oligarch who grossly overpaid for the property, and there's no explanation for it. You have a fencing coach who was paid an extra $500,000 for his house, and you have Donald Trump being paid an extra $54 million by Russian oligarchs. You also have the media refusing to report on all the protests that happened yesterday around the country, protesting the Justice Department's refusal to release the Mueller report. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Stay tuned for more. That's it, y'all. I'll be back at you soon. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. These are the outrages. This is what we have to get through. Get your asses out in the street and start protesting. You heard? You heard? That's it, y'all. And until I talk to you next one, and thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Please subscribe. Just hit the subscribe button. Also, follow me on Twitter. You can use the handle @JerryQuickly on Twitter. Again, that's @JerryQuickly on Twitter. I love all y'all. I've been really, really feeling the love and the warmth. Really appreciate it. We're going to keep producing and putting these shows out while we prepare for a launch on a larger platform. Thanks, y'all. All. That's it. Until I talk to you next time. That's it.